So the youth peace and security agenda comes from the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 2250 that talks about, or rather, that affirms young people's agency in peace building and decision making. So before this resolution was adopted, we knew that young people are peace builders, they're activists, they're doing everything in the community to resolve conflict or to prevent conflict.
Yeah.
But there wasn't that official recognition at that level of decision making at the UN Security Council, which is the highest level of decision making when it comes to security efforts. And so this was a landmark resolution just to say we recognize young people, we see the potential, but also the actions that you're doing towards this.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Africa Written Podcast. I'm your host, Nontabego Mlambo. Today we are honored to be joined by Wevyn Muganda, a passionate and a trailblazing Kenyan expert on youth, peace and security in Africa. She's not only a fierce advocate for youth inclusion and peace-building processes, but also a shining example of what commitment, visionary leadership looks like. In this episode, she takes us to the heart of youth activism, unpacking the challenges young people face in engaging with peace and security structures, the barriers to participation, and the resilience it takes to push through. We'll also explore what the future of youth leadership in Africa could look like if given the space, support, and voice it deserves. So stay tuned, because this conversation is a call to action, a dose of inspiration, and a celebration of youth-led change on the African continent. Thank you so much, Wevyn, for joining me today to discuss such an important topic. Could you please just introduce yourself and tell us about your journey into becoming a youth peace and security expert?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. It's exciting. I like talking about youth, peace, and security, but generally about young people. So I'm a youth peace and security expert, and I started out as an activist, as a grassroots organizer. And so the journey has evolved over the years, and also as age goes by, right? So
Mhm.
starting out as an activist, and then
Yeah.
deepening the knowledge about the UN Security Council Resolution 2250. I think also living the experience of wanting this resolution to work, because I see the potential of what it could do.
Mhm.
And Yeah, other than that, I love to run, I love to walk, and I love being outside in nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. What exactly is the Youth Peace and Security Agenda?
Yeah, so the youth peace and security agenda comes from the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 2250 that talks about, or rather, that affirms young people's agency in peace building and decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So before this resolution was adopted, we knew that young people are peace builders, they're activists, they're doing everything in the community to resolve conflict or to prevent conflict.
Yeah.
There wasn't that official recognition at that level of decision making at the UN Security Council, which is the highest level of decision making when it comes to security efforts. And
Yeah.
so this was a landmark resolution just to say we recognize young people, we see the potential, but also the actions that you're doing towards this. Now,
Mm-hmm.
um, because of this resolution, countries, member states have an obligation to implement it.
Yeah.
And this resolution has five pillars. So we've had other resolutions adopted after it,
Okay.
2419, 2535, still building on the initial resolution.
Yeah.
But the main one, 2250, has five pillars. So it talks about participation. So
Okay.
young people have to be participating in peace processes. So it's
Yeah.
not now a favor anymore. It's an obligation that, when
Yeah.
we have peace processes, young people have to participate. But also on the other side, it's acknowledging that Young people's participation in peace processes strengthens the outcomes and decisions of peace processes. Then there's the prevention pillar, which talks about preventing violence. So ensuring that young people are free from violence, and also, like, analyzing it and looking at what are some of the factors that contribute to young people's vulnerability to violence: lack of
Yeah.
education, lack of income, and
Mm.
other intersectional identities that affect that. So maybe disability and so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this resolution this pillar on prevention puts the obligation on member states to prevent violence and to
Yeah.
ensure that people are free from violence. Then we have the protection, which again is closely linked to prevention. But for protection, it talks about in the event of conflict, or if there are any forms of violence, that young people are protected. So measures are particularly taken to ensure that young people are protected in whatever way. So this is where also part of the humanitarian work comes in.
Yeah.
Then it talks about partnerships. It recognizes that it's only through building partnerships with young people, either through in young people in schools, or young people leading organizations, or young people who are organized in different ways, that we can actually move forward. So recognizing young people as equal partners and not beneficiaries of peace processes. And the
Yeah.
final one is around reintegration and talking. I think this speaks to the fact that in some instances, for example, young people are already involved or engaged in violence.
Mm.
So, for those young people, member states have an obligation to rehabilitate them, to empower them, and to reintegrate them back into the society so that they can also be peace builders. So, those
Yeah.
are the key pillars of the youth peace and security agenda.
Yeah.
It can be more detailed, but I think in essence, that is the main that's the main aim of this agenda.
Yeah. Okay. So you spoke about participation. Why do you think that it is crucial for the youth to participate in peace building in the continent, specifically in Africa?
Yeah, I think my first response always is because we are part of the society. So if we are part of the society, then decisions cannot be made without us. Now, when we look at the African context specifically, we have a youth bulge. So many of the African countries, the population is below 35, 40, in fact, below 25.
Oh, yeah.
So those are really high numbers. So if there is conflict, or if there should be peace, then it's going to be because a majority of the population are actually involved either as perpetrators or as peace builders. So
Yeah.
if I'm looking at it from, like, my first degree is in mathematics, so I have to also
Oh,
the logical bit to say, even when we look at it statistically, if we are the
yeah.
majority of the population, then we are the majority of the decision makers. So
Yeah.
start by that. But then the other thing is that youth as a transition age, there are certain characteristics of youthfulness that actually allows us to be meaningful partners in peace processes. The fact that we are passionate, we still believe we can change the world. We're
Mm,
creative, we're innovative, we are bold with our ideas.
yeah.
Uh, so we're at a time where we have the opportunity to actually contribute innovatively to
Yeah.
processes,
Yeah.
right? So I think that for me, when I think of the youthfulness, that's something that I think is important for young people to participate, and also because it's I think when we look at how leaders, the journey towards leadership, in as much as we say young people are the leaders of today, but how many young people are actually making decisions? We're
Mm,
leading, yes, but how many of us are making decisions that
mm,
are shifting things at the scale of the country or globally?
yeah.
We're influencing decisions. But for
Mm,
many of us, we're still, we're advocating. We are, we're educating, we're increasing
mm,
awareness. But let's say if there's a decision to be made about a conflict somewhere, it is not on
mm,
us as young people to make that decision, but we do
mm.
and so I believe that, our youthfulness and that transitional age also allows us to build the skills, the experience, and the networks that we need to be able to be the leaders that actually make good decisions.
Yeah,
These the presidents that we have now, the ministers that we have now, they were just young people like us. And
at
so
some
it's
point.
very
Yeah.
important. It's very important that during this transition, that we don't take it lightly. It's
Mm,
important that we become different, that we exercise the integrity that we want to see,
mm.
that
Yeah.
we learn empathy, that we learn leadership, that we learn how to relate with people. We
Mm,
understand social injustices, not just from our position, but also from the bigger goal, so that
yeah.
when we become the presidents and the members of parliament, then we are making the right decision. So I feel like that's also why it's important for us to be part of these processes at whatever
Yeah.
level we're at. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned the UNSCR 2050,
Mhm.
2250. I mean, how effective has it been in Africa?
I mean, I am usually conflicted with this
Okay.
because as a youth organizer for many years, I've seen I've seen the potential of the resolution, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I can speak to the impact of it.
Uh,
I don't think that it's been documented well and enough for
yeah.
us to truly understand the impact of the resolution in Africa.
Yeah.
But I have seen the progress that and the potential that the resolution has. So, for example, when you look at Kenya and
Mm,
Nigeria and DRC, these are countries that have a very high youthful population,
mm,
also quite polarizing political situations, but a very vibrant, like, youth activism
mm,
kind of thing. So, like,
yeah.
um, and also politically very important countries in the continent. DRC is, very big, very
Big.
wealthy, but
Mm,
also has had conflict for so long. And so to see young people in that country mobilize, bring
yeah.
stakeholders, bring decision makers, and present their recommendations, approaches, and advocate for ways in which the country can build national peace through this
Yeah.
resolution. For me, that has been very inspiring to see.
Mm,
And it's
yeah.
also telling of the potential that this resolution has. So, if we are able to rally behind the force that's these young people through the coalitions on youth peace and security that are doing this,
Mm,
and they're able to convince their ministers and their political leaders to actually implement it. I
yeah.
think we will be able to see more progress in when it comes to peace. So to say, I think I've seen progress, but I'm also practical in the sense that the whole goal is to achieve peace. And so, for as long as we still have the conflict that we have, then I think
Mm,
that the resolution isn't really doing well.
mm,
And it's still very theoretical. It's still
yeah.
very policy based, and
Mm,
so there hasn't been that, like, tangible, that you can say, oh wow, we see this. We've seen
mm,
more young people involved in peace processes, but I haven't seen a lot of data and evidence about how that has influenced the peace
yeah.
process itself, and
Yeah.
to see the influence of the young people in the outcomes of the peace process.
Yeah.
That's
Just
not, yeah, that's not just a policy or a document.
yeah. Just
Yeah.
to follow up on that,
Yeah.
what do you, as a person who's been involved in YPS, the
Yeah.
YPS agenda, what would you suggest maybe needs to happen for it to be to be effective the way we would want to see it being?
Yeah, I think first of all is that so practically, I think we need to stop looking at the agenda as this new thing
Mm,
that we need to budget for and like dedicate to, we need to stop separating it from the general agenda of human rights and social justice and youth
mm,
development,
yeah,
because that's what it's all about. Young people are either getting victimized, are either victims or perpetrators, for example, because of lack of basic human rights and access to
yeah,
the fundamentals, as well as living in a society that's already broken by social inequalities. So we can't separate, like, we shouldn't look at it. It's important as a framework to look at, to think through, to help us analyze. So give
mm,
us, a framework in which we can think through this agenda. But I think in practice, we need to look at the underlying principles, which is human rights, social justice, freedom, because you can put young people at the table of decision making when you haven't demystified stereotypes about young people, you
yeah,
know, because there is, for many member states and many governments and agencies, it's still, we are going to implement the YPS agenda, but they want to do it in a particular way, in the way that they think works. But
mm,
the majority of young people are actually not involved in crime. So more work is needed to prevent violence, um, and also to protect and participate and partner. But from the, like, we tend to give bandage aid solutions to things.
yeah,
Like, for example, we have a femicide crisis. Let's come up with a femicide policy. I mean, it's good we institutionalize it,
yeah,
but we have to understand that femicide is an underlying, it's a manifestation of underlying social issues. So it's the same case with the youth peace and security agenda. Until we truly address the underlying social issues that affect young people,
yeah,
like, young people cannot be peace builders if they're hungry. They cannot be peace builders if they are struggling with their identity, confidence. You know, young people cannot be peace builders if their mental health is in the pits. So
mm,
it's looking at young people, what are their needs, and being deliberate about meeting those needs. I
yeah,
think that's the basic level. I think we need to just see young people as people with agency,
yeah,
but also people with needs. And so, how do we affirm their agency? By providing them with opportunities for income, for education, for self-reliance, for empowerment. Not trying to train young people into employees, but empowering young people to be people of good character, people of, like, people who can lead communities and schools and networks, but also understanding that we had a brief discussion about this, that we also are living through the consequences of colonial injustices,
yeah,
historical injustices. And so we can't just look at the YPS agenda as the solution to conflict. We
yeah,
have to, we have the YPS agenda, but look at the young people in Gaza, look at the young people in Sudan, look at the young
yeah,
people in DRC. Of what use is a resolution if it's not able to protect a young person in a conflict setting?
yeah,
So just to say that Policy and framework is good to think about the issues, but at the end of the day, the fundamentals is that young people have agency and needs and rights that have to be respected and upheld for them to actually be peace builders. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Having been an activist yourself, what have you seen to be some of the biggest challenges that African youth face
Yeah.
in peace building?
I think it's without just sounding like a broken record, it's resources.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be resources and not just resources for peace building itself, but personal resources. Because the setting that the setting that enables you or pushes you into peace building is a setting that also is, there is probably economic disenfranchisement. You're economically disempowered, so you feel the pinch of unemployment and it pushes you towards peace building, or you have the knowledge and you're empowered and so you want to lead and make change.
Yeah.
So is resources. So, for example, as I was starting my activism, I was very passionate. I used to write a lot
Yeah.
because writing is the only thing I could do that didn't require me to have a grant or have a fund to do. I just needed to have a platform where I could put out some of my ideas and thoughts. And so at least we live in a world that's that advanced that can give young people their opportunities besides what is given, if you want to say that, given to us.
Yeah.
But the other challenge that I found is that, like I said, youthfulness is a transitional period. So you're struggling with different other things. You're coming
Yeah.
into identity. You are trying to also build social relationships. You are also outgrowing your other social relationships. You're dealing with family, you're dealing with, so it's not, and especially in the African context where, we have young people who take care, who are caregivers. Our culture doesn't, we don't put older parents in homes. We don't, even for people who are like sick or even have mental conditions or disability, we likely will be
Stay with
caregivers.
them.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
stay with them, we do that. So we have to understand the cultural context and the nuances in that transitional age for us. There's
Yeah.
social expectations where you finished uni, where is your job? And then for young African women, we have to talk about the social norms and expectations around marriage. um, how deeply patriarchy is ingrained, such that we are not able to really fulfill our dreams because we're conditioned to want to aspire to marriage or
At a certain
feel
age. Yeah.
and status, and like that is the status. And so
Mm.
all of these things, in addition to the political situation, I mean, I think that in itself is such a complex challenge, and that's why it's very hard to implement youth programs. Because for me, it could be a mental health issue. For someone else, it could be unemployment. For someone else,
Yeah.
it's black tax. Like, but we're still going through somehow the same experience of youth disempowerment. Like, we somehow feel the consequences of everything in the same way. So politically, you find that young people will advocate, will fight for a while, and then it gets to a point you're like, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I'd rather, water apathy comes in. You don't want to participate because why should you do it anyway? The old people, they will still. So I think it's deliberate, because when your spirit is killed, then you can't keep up the fight. You can't keep up the
Yeah.
struggle. So part of the challenge is it's not just about economic resources, but I think because we're at the age where we are moving from depending on our family to depending on ourselves, that transition is very hard. and we start to then, we start to look at politics differently. You start
Mm.
to understand why the tax laws are the way they are, like, so this, it's a lot to process, to understand. And
Yeah.
so the thing with this period is that there needs to be a lot of investment, financial investment, technical investment, a lot of capacity building. That's why fellowships, trainings, scholarships for young people are so important, because these are the opportunities that truly shape your vision and the way you see life, and how, in turn, it influences how, things work out for you.
Yeah. Um, I think you already answered this, but
Yeah,
you may maybe just want to add something.
yeah.
I was gonna ask, in a continent like ours with the highest rates of unemployment, how then does that affect? And you said something about how you can't be uh, peace building when you're hungry. How do factors like that, unemployment, maybe lack of
Hmm.
education, people that didn't even go to university or can't afford university, how
Yeah.
does all of that affect youth participation in peace building?
Yeah. So I think the thing with education and socioeconomic rights, having access to health, having access to social services, it opens up opportunities and it gives you choices. And that's what many young people are struggling with. We don't have as many choices. So
Choices.
if you
Yeah.
don't have many choices or opportunities, then you take the easy one out, or the one that's available, or the one that's handed to you. And that's where the vulnerability comes in.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a chance to pursue an education, you're staying home, you're a, I don't know, like 14-year-old girl not going to school. Of course, you're not having a formal job. So you're staying home, you're reduced to probably caregiving for your younger siblings or parents. Then that exposes you to older men who are likely to then take advantage of you. You then end up a teenage mom, then you're looped into this cycle of poverty. So it's a loop that, and so it's that we need to provide young people with as many opportunities as possible so that they can have a choice. When you go to education, think about it. Even when you're just in school, you're just pursuing one path, school. At some
Yeah.
point, you're asked to choose the uni that you want to go to and the cause that you want to study.
Yeah.
So that means you can exercise your agency. Now imagine that you want to be, a doctor, you have the grades for it, you have the passion for it, but
Yeah.
you have the way to get to uni or get that education. That reduces you to any other option that's available. If you're
Yeah.
lucky, maybe you'll take another course, a degree, but most people, you end up now like doing manual jobs, which then keep you in the cycle of poverty. So you're not
Yeah.
able to really move yourself from situations. So it's something that in the African context we need to, in as much as people say that, oh, there's a lot of educated people who are unemployed, that's true. But the whole point of education was never to be employment. Capitalism and every other politics turned it into that. But the whole
Yeah.
point of education is to free your mind, to emancipate yourself, to learn how to think and to think critically, so that we have the power to identify when politicians are manipulating us and when they're
Yeah.
truly, you know, because most of us lack that critical thinking skills.
Yeah. True.
Most of us lack dialogue skills, so we can't engage in meaningful dialogue with people with differing opinions. So that's where the conflict starts. So we can't look at just education as just as a means to employment. And when we look at employment, we can't just look at it as a means to survive. It has to be meaningful work. And meaningful work for young people includes paying them well, a good work environment, an environment that allows them to explore their ideas, their innovation, so I think looking at things holistically, and that's why I said agency and needs and rights, and looking at how all of these can lead to young people being peace builders, because um, when you look at informal settlements, yes, we do have peace builders, young peace builders who are not employed, but still using their own resources to build relationships in the communities, to educate, to
Mm.
do that should be compensated for.
Yeah.
So over time, they will burn out and they will crash. And if they don't do that, then over time, we're leaving these young peace builders and leaders vulnerable to what? To corruption when the opportunity arises, to
Mm.
manipulation, to co-opting. That's why you'll see very people who are now in higher places, and people say, oh, when they were young, they were so passionate and they were so
Yeah.
honest. They did
Mm.
that for so long, and they went hungry for so long,
Long. Yeah.
that they realized actually no one values integrity, no one
Mm.
values honest work. So
Yeah.
when someone manipulates me and takes advantage of me, then let me so it's understanding the complexities and the nuances. Of course, it's not that simple, and not everyone is like that, but that's
Yeah.
the reality that we live in.
Yeah.
That's
True.
just the reality that we live in here.
Yeah. How do we ensure inclusivity in building efforts? Like, how can we ensure that young women and marginalized, maybe youth, maybe
Yeah,
people belonging to the LGBTQI plus
yeah,
community, and maybe people living with disabilities
yeah,
get they're included in peace building efforts?
yeah. I think first there's different levels of inclusion. There's the first thing, I think representation is the first step, ensuring that there are representatives of different groups. That when you look into the room, you can see, diversity, like
Yeah.
of all forms, ability, ethnicity, race, age, and all of that. But then also we have to understand that it's not enough to have representation. We have to design and um, we have to design our policies and interventions with minority groups in mind. So I
Yeah.
don't have to be a person with disability for me to think about um, how to make my program more disability friendly. The
Uh-huh.
challenge usually comes that there's usually what people in the development side will say the cost of inclusion. So people will look at the cost of inclusion and be like, okay, we want to include them, but we can't because we don't have the resources, so we will not do it this time. But for institutions, there's no excuse, because the cost of inclusion is the cost of actually achieving peace, achieving development. So representation, also designing with co-creation with minority groups, but also breaking the barriers legally for these groups to participate. There are legal and structural barriers that prevent certain people from participating. So, like
Yeah.
for young women, looking at, like I said, what are the nuances that underline our realities that prevent us from participating? If there's if there's a peace process, and sorry, there's a consultation for something that's happening, and it's being done at a time when most young women with children have to be caring for their babies, or have to be doing kitchen work. In the African context, we know almost a typical day in
Mm.
let's say like a married woman's house. So imagine if
Yeah.
you're a young woman, you've gone to work or school, you come back, you have a young child, you probably don't have a nanny, or you do, but you have to still do that.
Mm.
How will you have the energy and the time to meaningfully participate in
That's
such a
it.
process?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we need to move beyond just representation and understand that there are certain realities. Like when we do this gender exercise around auditing your day, you look at how
Mm.
much time you have for yourself, for the community, and for the social work, and realize women don't have any time for themselves. All of it is towards caring for families,
Mm.
communities,
Mm.
workplaces. So we also have to design peace processes in ways that then allow women to participate. And
Yeah.
the only way is to go where women are. We already know women organize in, we call them chamas in Kenya, like these small circles, welfares, like these groups.
Yeah.
Women, they contribute money and merry-go-round.
Oh, we call it Stockfell. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we have these local ways of organizing that has always worked before
Mm.
banks came.
Yeah.
Women were saving money and investing
Yeah.
with no knowledge of BCom or like commerce or no MBA.
Yes.
So in that setting, if we truly want to involve rural women, then we have to also go where they are and use the strategies that they use for their own empowerment and integrate peace building into that. So
Yeah.
if you go for these meetings, that's the best place to find the women and empower them so that you're
Yeah.
not removing them from already the busy schedule or the whatever it is. So same as disability, it's not just about structural access. It's also
Mm.
recognizing that they have a different reality of life that may affect them and how they participate. So, intersectional analysis as always,
Mm.
representation, but going back to the local and indigenous ways that these groups are already
Mm.
organizing. Because we in the development space like to believe and assume that our innovations are new, but they're
Yeah.
just on existing practices.
True.
They're just these are things that we were doing pre-colonial times in different ways. So how do we just integrate them into the modern way of doing things?
Yeah. Okay. During the month of March every year, so these organizations and institutions they meet in New York, and you've taken part. You've
Hmm.
taken part in these meetings of the Commission of the Status of Women to
Yeah,
promote gender equality
yeah.
and to empower women. Do you think that those institutions are, doing enough to support women and youth, or do you think also do they make decisions that are, because we're so diverse, the world is so big, and
Yeah,
our problems they sometimes need our local solutions. Do you
yeah.
think going to these meetings does something for, to support women and the youth in peace building?
Yes and no. Because like you said, we're diverse and our
Mm,
realities are very different. So of course it is assumed that those who participate, like myself, are representation of, this diversity that is there.
okay.
Um, and so I think the intention usually is good. Now, when you attend these sessions, some of them are very ceremonial, it's more of a
Mm,
formality.
yeah.
It's mostly people are presenting or chest thumping what they've done and what
Mm,
they've achieved.
yeah.
And so it really sometimes doesn't leave room for meaningful and constructive criticism. Also,
Yeah.
understanding the ways in which the UN works and its processes work, it's
Yeah.
that it's it's more like let's bring people together to keep thinking through this or to say what they're doing about this, with the intention that when they go back into their communities, they're able to somehow apply these lessons and also bring down the leadership. That's the
Yeah.
intention. That's the assumption. But I think more often than not, that is not achieved, and so it's become a wasteful exercise,
Yeah.
economically, and also it's also become a way to enable existing inequalities. So how many young people can afford to go to New York? Not
Yeah.
random young people, but young
Mm,
peacemakers, young leaders who are doing innovative things. How many of
yeah.
them can even get a
The
visa?
thought.
Let's talk about
Yeah.
Africans.
Yeah.
Let's talk about young Africans accessing
Mm,
visas. It's a whole it's another way of enabling socioeconomic inequalities and global inequalities that already exist.
Yeah.
So then you go there and you only have 3 minutes or 5 minutes to say your
To
point.
just say something.
So I think there's more use in some of the closed door meetings. Of course, it's not always about the events. Most of the work, most of the impact I've found by attending these meetings is always the relationships that you build that then allow you to either partner or scale or get investments for your work. But when it
Yeah.
comes to pushing progress, I think the event is more uh, like member states want to show that they're doing, even though we know that they're not doing. And so why are we all lying to each other that we're making progress when we're not?
You
So
not, yeah.
I think it depends on, I think there are different strategies to make the process meaningful. Like I said, through like intentional strategies to build relationships with allies, partners. But there's a lot that's needed to ensure that the UN itself
Yeah.
is an institution that can be trusted to deliver on, you know,
Mm.
the mandate that it has.
Mm.
So once we're able to build that trust, I think we can see it differently. But for now, I'd say it's a gamble. It's a gamble. You can spend so much money, go to New York, and not achieve anything for yourself
Mm.
and
Mm.
even for your agenda and even for your organization. That is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Another challenge that the world has right now is climate change, and we've heard so many times that climate change is a threat to world peace and security. How can young people be better included in decision making processes related to climate peace and climate justice, peace and security?
Yeah. I think young people are already involved.
Mm.
Most of the climate advocacy is being led by young people.
Mm.
Uh, and there are young women and also diverse groups that are advocating for a better environment. So I would say what invest in these initiatives, invest in these efforts
Mm.
uh, through continuous capacity building, financial resources that allows young people to actually do climate work full time. Because the work that young people are doing is important work. So it
Yeah.
needs to be recognized and needs to be compensated so that young people can continue doing this work, whether it's peace building or it's climate action. That's the
Yeah.
only way that we're going to see progress, because there's so many policies, good and some fairly good, that have been adopted at the global level, whether it's at COP or at the UN, that then
Mm.
the realities is at the community level, and that's where the young people are taking the most action. So there's need to invest more in this, but also just integrating climate education within either formal or informal education systems or spaces where young people are, so that we begin to understand the climate crisis, but also how we can be problem solvers from a point that is more relatable to us. Because the climate crisis also is, when you look at the West, they are going vegan, they are wearing certain types of fabric to be able
Mm.
to contribute to the climate solutions. But for us as Africans, our realities is that meat and maybe cattle and all of this is part of our cultural
True.
identity.
It
And
is.
even with all of that, we still, even with all of our cattle and cows and animals, we still are not the biggest contributors to the climate crisis.
True. Yeah.
All the pollution, most of the pollution comes from the more developed countries. So
Mm.
it can be quite unfair to say, let's all not eat meat, or let's all encourage young people to wear sustainable clothes or whatever. Like, these solutions at the end of the day have to be localized. And the
Yeah.
only way is to invest in young people's solutions because they are local, they are contextual, and they're based on their own realities. So that's the only way to like move forward. And then
Mm,
creating spaces for these young people who are leading climate solutions to influence and make decisions now at the global level or at the regional level because
mm,
they bring the experience, the first-hand experience of doing the work. They know how these policies will sit with the people. Will they work? Will they not work? So it
mm.
has to be a top down, and bottom up, and a little bit of middle mix approach when it
Yeah,
comes to really positioning young people as leaders of the climate crisis.
yeah. Could you please just talk about any initiative that you've taken part in that you are, proud of, or any of your proudest moments since you started
Yeah.
this work?
I think my proudest moment as is being able to. I think it's being able to personally live through some of the values that I believe in when it comes to youth activism.
Yeah.
So when we started, I told you I'm a youth peace and security expert, not an activist, not a youth
Yes.
activist.
Yeah.
Directly because when I turned 30, and while the age for youth in Africa is 35,
That is
I
right. Yeah.
believe that as someone who's benefited from the youth space,
Mm.
I needed to step back and allow others to step up so that
Yeah.
the movement can actually move forward. So one of my biggest achievements is being able to step back from the youth movement and take a more back approach of like supporting other young people, ensuring
Yeah.
that the knowledge that I accumulated in the years that I was doing my activism, that knowledge
Yeah.
is passed down to other movements, to other organizations, to other young people, so that they can lead and have the impact and outcomes that I did when I did. So I
Yeah.
know, I mean, I think I'm very proud of so many achievements, including, briefing the UN Security Council on youth peace and security.
Yeah.
But I think the living through the values that I was advocating for. So
Mm.
it's to say that as young people, we need to know that we're transitioning. So we
Yeah.
do our part, we lead, and then we step aside and go into new spaces of perhaps making decisions. So now we're making decisions, not influencing, um,
Mm-hmm.
but allowing yourself to go through this transition, empower yourself, take a step back, and allow other young people to lead and support other young people to lead so that we truly let the youth movement remain vibrant, remain
Mm.
youthful, remain passionate. You don't want
Mm.
to kill the spirits of the younger ones who are coming in to say, oh,
Mm.
we're always listening to the same voices at the
People.
UN. No, no, no. There's now step back so that we can hear new voices at the UN,
Yeah.
we can hear new voices at the AU, we can hear new voices at the national parliaments
Mm.
as young people. And also just believing that as there's space for all of us and all of our radical ideas and innovation. So
Mm-hmm.
moving away from the spirit of competition that's usually there in the youth engagement and youth movement space, and
Yeah.
thinking more abundance. It's I think it's more within the civil society and development space,
Yeah.
thinking competitively as opposed to collaboratively. But so now I think there's the opportunity for us as young people to do differently
Yeah.
and say that we will practice collaboration, we will practice passing down leadership, or we will practice co-leading with other
Mm.
young people or co-creating so that we actually let young people just be young people and lead, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's something that I'm proud of, and currently just mentoring other young women leading active citizens, which is a civitech startup based in
Mm.
Kenya. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Um, for people that are not in conflict zones, like for me, as a South African, I only I would say I only knew about the YPS agenda, WPS agenda when I became a journalist,
Yeah,
but I didn't know, and because I didn't know, obviously I didn't care. What
yeah,
advice would you give to young Africans who are living in countries where there's just no conflict, and they know nothing about, this this YPS, and how can they be involved if they want to be involved in this
yeah,
work?
yeah. So first I'll just quote, I don't know who said it, but it's a common quote that
Mm,
peace is not the absence of war. And
mm,
so we need to understand, even if you're not in an active conflict zone, that peace is very volatile, stability is very volatile,
true.
especially within our context. A
Mm,
country will just have an election, and then suddenly years and years of peace and stability is ruined in a day.
mm,
That is possible.
true.
On the flip side is, other than preventing violence, we have to look at conflict from a social justice standpoint, which is gender-based violence is still happening, sexual and gender-based violence,
Yes.
femicide is still happening, even if you're not in
Yeah.
conflict.
It's done.
Domestic violence is still happening.
Yeah.
Still forms of violence, perhaps subtle. There's still, maybe racial violence in certain
Yeah.
countries. So we
Yeah.
still have to take a much deeper understanding and analysis of conflict that moves beyond war and police brutality
Mm-hmm.
or terrorism or, like, communal conflict. No, we have to look at unemployment is a conflict issue,
Yeah.
because what happens when young men, for example, are not able to be providers? It bruises their masculinity. It bruises their, that is a potential threat to violence.
Yeah.
So because we understand that, we understand that provision is what gives that identity. In the African culture, men are expected
Mm,
to provide.
to
So
provide. Yeah.
when they can't provide because they are unemployed, yet they have good education, they've empowered themselves,
Mm,
we're building, or rather we're creating the vulnerability that leads them to violence. So I would
yeah.
say that, as young Africans, we just need to care about everything. They always make this joke that if you want to hide something from someone, I think a young African, you put it in a book. We cannot be the generation that doesn't read, that
Read.
doesn't take an interest in politics or in
Mm,
policy. We can't afford to do that anymore. And now I'm so glad that more and more young people are becoming more politically conscious
true.
and actually taking an interest in the politics in their country, because that's the
Mm,
only way to go. Only through building our knowledge, building our minds, building our resilience, are we able to truly withstand the struggle, because it's a long path to the total freedom and peace. We're still so far away from it globally and as a continent.
yeah.
So to have the resilience to withstand the challenges that, and overcome the challenges that come with being part of the movement and the struggle, but at the same time acknowledging that we still have an opportunity now. There's still something as young Africans we can do now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So finally, what is your vision for the future of youth peace and security in Africa?
I think my vision is to see member states truly take this agenda seriously. I don't think they do. Truly take
Yeah.
it seriously and be willing to co create and co lead with young people. I
Yeah.
think that I would like to see that. That would mean so much impact and so much progress if we can co create and co lead with decision makers. Then I think we can actually build the world peace that the UN has been looking for. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. We've come
Okay.
to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for taking part and for all that you do for the
Thank you.
youth in the continent. Yeah. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
And thank you for the opportunity to talk about this.
As we wrap up this powerful conversation on the youth, peace, and security agenda in Africa, one thing is clear: young people are not just the future, they are the present. Their voices, experiences, and leadership are critical in shaping peaceful, just, and inclusive societies across the continent. The road may be filled with challenges, but the determination, innovation, and resilience of African youth continues to break barriers and drive meaningful change. Let's keep amplifying youth voices, investing in their potential, and creating spaces where they can lead boldly and authentically. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Africa Within podcast. Until next time, goodbye.